Try saying something sincere to a millennial. Go ahead, tell them you're proud of them, that you believe in them, that things are going to work out. Watch what happens. They'll smile, maybe nod, and then say something just slightly off. A joke that deflects, a comment that undercuts, a smirk where a thank you should be. And if you call it out, if you say, "Why are you being sarcastic?" they will look you dead in the eye and say something sarcastic about being sarcastic. Millennials are, by most cultural measures, the most sarcastic generation alive. It is in their humor, their communication style, their coping mechanisms, their entire relationship with sincerity. And most people treat this as a personality quirk, an attitude problem, a generational affectation. It is none of those things. It's a survival strategy built from very specific ingredients over a very specific period of time. The easy explanation starts in the 1990s. Gen X had already done the cultural groundwork. They had given the world irony as a posture, disaffection as an aesthetic, whatever as a complete sentence. And millennials, as children and teenagers, absorbed all of it. Daria, Reality Bites, Clerks, the entire early internet, a media landscape that treated earnestness as embarrassing and detachment as intelligence. To care too openly was to be naive. To be excited was to be uncool. And to be cool was to seem like you didn't need any of it. This is the version most people know. Millennials caught irony like a virus from Gen X, ran it through the early internet, and produced a generation that communicates exclusively in subtext. It's a fine explanation. It's just not the whole one. To understand where millennial sarcasm actually comes from, you have to understand what it was protecting against. Force 1, the parenting shift. The generation that raised millennials was, broadly, the first to treat childhood as something to be optimized. Participation trophies, scheduled play dates, the self-esteem movement of the 1980s and 90s, a school culture that told every child they were exceptional, where praise was tied to identity rather than effort. The result was a generation that learned that how they appeared mattered more than what they actually did. Performance became the primary currency, and sincerity became a liability. Because if you care openly and fail openly, you lose everything. But if you never seem to care that much to begin with, you can't really lose. Force 2, the screen. Millennials were the first generation to grow up with an audience. Not a real audience at first. AM away messages, early MySpace, the first blogs, but an audience nonetheless. And having an audience before you have a fully formed identity is a strange and specific kind of pressure. You learn to perform yourself before you know who you are. You learn that presentation matters, that the right quote in your away message says something about you, that how you frame things is as important as the things themselves. Irony is the perfect tool for this environment. It lets you say something without fully committing to it. It lets you be seen without being known. It creates plausible deniability for the self. Force 3. The world didn't cooperate. Millennials were told, consistently and emphatically, that they were special, that they could be anything, that hard work would be rewarded, and then they graduated into the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Student debt that had tripled in a decade, a housing market that had already run away from them, an entry-level job market that required 5 years of experience. The gap between what they were told and what they found was enormous, and sarcasm is, among other things, the language of that gap. It is what you speak when the world turns out to be ironic, and no one warned you. Here's the thing about armor. It works. Sarcasm is genuinely effective emotional protection. It creates distance. It deflects. It signals intelligence while revealing nothing. But here's the other thing about armor. You still feel everything underneath it. Millennials are not actually cynical. Studies consistently show they are one of the most values-driven generations in recorded consumer and workplace research. They want meaning. They want purpose. They quit jobs that don't align with their values at higher rates than any generation before them. They are not checked out. They are deeply, almost inconveniently, checked in. The sarcasm was never indifference. It was the shape that caring took, when caring directly felt too dangerous, which explains something that looks, on the surface, like a contradiction. The most ironic generation in modern history is also the most obsessed with being authentic. Keep it real, no filter, genuine, authentic. These are millennial words, millennial values, millennial search terms. The generation that built irony into its default mode of communication is the same generation that made authenticity its highest aspiration. That is not a contradiction. That is a map. The sarcasm marks the distance between where they are and where they want to be. It is the voice of someone who learned early that openness is risky, that sincerity invites ridicule, that caring loudly is how you get hurt, and who has spent their entire adult life quietly trying to find their way back to it anyway. So the next time a millennial says something cutting, or when a sincere moment gets deflected with a joke, when the thank you comes out sideways, know that the armor is not the person. Know that underneath the deflection is someone who was trained very early to protect the part of themselves that actually cares, and who, if you're patient enough, if the moment is safe enough, will sometimes put it down, not because the world got less ironic, but because some things are worth the risk, even now, even still.